Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome back to the Battle Chads. Josh, say hello to our wonderful, wonderful viewers.
Hello, everybody.
And we also have nice little Dan here, our newest member to Team Chad Magic, one of the 3 new joiners. How you doing, Dan?
I'm all good, Luis. Thank you for having me on.
It's always a pleasure. It's always a pleasure. Not too bad, mate. So, guys, today we're going to be talking about Standard. Wonderful, good old Standard. Everyone's new, old favorite format. Something like that. It's been going quite well since the RCQ season has kicked off. Standard events are at pretty much an all-time high. Even with Modern around the corner for all the RCs. Standard's still going strong, and we're expected to continue going strong post-RC, even higher, because no one's going to have anything else to play. And we're going to be talking about the top 5 decks that we think you should be on right now if you're looking to win an RCQ or something even bigger, as it's right about that time where everyone should be settling into a good deck and getting ready to roll. You guys excited to talk about these good old decks?
Yes. I'm
Yes,
just
I
happy. I'm just happy. I mean, you said Standard's at an all-time high. I don't think it is an all-time high. I think you'll never get Standard. Well, Standard isn't quite the way it was when Fatal Push was the promo at F&M. That was like the peak Standard for me.
Oh, yeah, that was so good. You had like
Yeah,
Path
so
to
good.
Exile, yeah.
Sorry. Since the pandemic, my apologies.
Yeah. Since Standard, yeah.
Fatal Push.
I would say since Arena became a thing, but Standard is it's a really great format for so introducing players. It's a really great format for using the cards you get out of draft, etc. Sealed stuff. So it's a really great format that I think LGSs should really be supporting and pushing. And it's just it's one of the best standards, like generically best standard formats I've known since the red. I know red's dominating now. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the red sort of decks back in Amoket sort of era of the Fatal Push standard, shall we say? That's great.
Which is a good callback since we're about to go into Aether Drift as well, the Aether Revolt style place where Fatal Push came to be, that kind of thing, or with Kaladesh and all those. So I'm really excited to see how everything has changed, how everything is, because while red is strong, it's definitely not as single-handedly the strongest only thing that exists in the world like it was back then.
Yeah.
And we've all been there for those rough times in Standard when Oko was around, Oro was around, or the Spark. Awful times of Standard, or even Ikoria was not a good time. Much healthier now. We're feeling good. We're feeling happy, I think. It's a good spot for Standard. It feels like there's a lot of movement, a lot going on. And decks are kind of popping out of the woodwork. We had the Esper Pixies deck most recently that just kind of popped up from nowhere. The cards have been there for a while, and it just suddenly came to be.
And even more recently, the Omniscience combo deck. It's not on our list, but it's still there in the realms of MTG Goldfish. You want to check that out?
So one of those really fun decks, yeah.
We'll just talk about how we're going to run this pod, though, because as we did with it's going to mirror much as we did with the top 5 in the modern deck we did on the previous one, where we're not going to actually have a visual display of the decks. It's going to be an audio pod predominantly, but if you want to watch our, well, I'd say beautiful faces, but I'll leave that to the viewers to decide. We have the video as well, but we're gonna talk about 5 archetypes that we believe are the best thing you should be doing, the best thing you can be doing in Standard right now. Once we talk about them, we're going to provide example deck lists in the show notes, so then the viewer can then go on the show notes, click the decks, and then do some research from there. Usually, I think we're going to use MTG Goldfish as the source for that, so you can then look at other pilots, what they're doing, etc.
Exactly. And it's also good if you're as you're listening along, it's always a good thing to have the deck list open so you can understand and see the cards we're talking about. We will try and call them out for you guys for anyone who might not know. But there's some reasonable level of expectation that you might know a card or two that we're talking about. And if you don't, you can always look it up on the deck list there for you.
So Dan, you
Hello.
were on our podcast previously. You won an RCQ with a red deck.
I did. Mono Red
and you did a deck tech for us on
Yep.
Battle Chats. So I think if you lads are willing to move on to the top 5, that you should introduce the first deck for us.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. So the first deck is Gruul Aggro. So there's first of all, before we get into sort of like a breakdown of the main board and the sideboard. There's like 2, maybe 3 different ways where you could build this green-red aggressive, low to the ground, very, very fast deck that can win on turn 2. So the first one, which is by 2 friends of mine, Nick and Stanley over in America, is a Leyline of Resonance. Yeah, Leyline of Resonance.
Sound it out,
Based
mono red
on,
player. Sound it out.
We can't read. No mono red player can read.
Put your crayons down. Stop eating them.
Yeah, sorry. So Leyline of Resonance is a 4-mana enchantment. It's very similar to Leyline of Void. So if you have it in your opening hand, you may begin with it on the battlefield for no cost whatsoever. And it reads, when you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only a single creature you control, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, if you have a card such as Cacophony Scamp or a Heartfire Hero on turn 1, and then turn 2, untap, play a land, and then attack for just 1. No one's blocking it, it's just 1 damage. You're like, yeah, sure, it's fine. And then you just play 2 pump spells, whether this be a Monstrous Rage or a Turn Inside Out. Now, Monstrous Rage gives target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it creates a monster roll attached to that creature. So the roll gives it +1/+1 and trample. So you're getting +3 damage from that, and then the Leyline copies it. So you get +3 and then 2, because you don't get a second roll, which is a bit unfortunate. And then turn inside out, very similar to that. Target creature gets +3/+0 until end of turn, and then when this creature dies, manifest dread. So if it does die, then you get an extra body. Or with Leyline out, you copy it, and then if it dies, you get 2 bodies out. So that's already on turn 2 a massive amount of output and damage that not a lot of decks can come back from, especially when you're playing, say, like Slickshot Show Off or Questingers to refill your hand, or even just Ember Heart Challenger. Ember Heart Challenger is just an absolute house when it comes to card advantage. And then you've got cards like Callous Sellsword, which can just finish players off like there's no tomorrow. So that's the first version of the Gruul deck. The next one is just more of like a stereotypical prowess deck, which runs like your Swift Spears, your Ember Heart Challengers, one of my favorite cards, Slickshot Show Off, and just a bunch of burn spells as well. And then also a new addition to a lot of these decks, Innkeeper's Talent, which is a 2-mana enchantment, which is a class. At the beginning of combat on your turn,
You're doing the mono red players proud. I honestly, man, this is amazing.
It's any card that doesn't have a casting cost of 2 or less, or it's not red. I've struggled to read them. It's just ugh. So Innkeeper's Talent, 2-mana enchantment. Well, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. You can level up to level 2 for just a single green. Permanents you control with counters on them have Ward 2, and then level 3.
Ward 1.
Yes, what did I say? Level 2.
Ward 2.
Yeah,
Level 2,
Ward
Ward 1.
Yeah. And then level 3, you don't really do much, but that essentially just doubles the counters on any of your creatures. So again, just a very fast deck, and it plays my next favorite card, Screaming Nemesis. Just a beautiful card. It's just so good. Makes blocking very, very difficult, especially when you have cards like Monstrous Rage. Screaming Nemesis, 3-mana 2/2 haste. When it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target, and if a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. That last bit of wording at the very end is just it's amazing. I hate playing against mono white when they just play Beze and gain 4 life, make a fish.
Beze's so good.
Card. Beze is so good.
Shout out to Lucas.
No, they've definitely made some very pushed cards lately. Screaming Nemesis is a 3-mana 3/3 already with haste, let alone that last ability. It's something amazing to see, something really, really, really cool to see with some of the new design that they're doing. It's obviously not as pushed as some of the old Fire design cards, but I'm happy with the power level and how things are going. It's not as much as it used to be, which I'm really happy for because it was too much, but it's still very strong, still very flashy, and it looks really, really cool with a lot of the newer pieces that they have going on. Valiant has been I think, overall successful mechanic. It's not overly strong like Heroic could have been if they reintroduced that, but it also allows you to have better triggers since they can only be done once per turn, which is a really just a nice thing to see. But this deck is impressive, right? The Skrull red aggro deck does so much. It just beats down on people from nowhere. Like you were saying, you could win on turn 2. A turn 1 Cacophony Scamp with a Leyline out, and then you give it 2 pump spells on the next turn. That's death. That's instantly death. You're easily going to get over 10 damage, and then you sack the Scamp, and boom, they're gone. Plays around cut down really, really well, because on the play especially, right? You go Scamp on 1. If they don't kill it right then and there, and you untap, they can only have 1 mana up that turn. If you go cut down, you go second pump spell, it's too big, it's over. Lights out, you're dead, gonzo. So it's a really, really, really cool thing to see. Even if it's a little non-gamey sometimes, I think giving this extra aspect to aggro decks is nice, because a lot of the times these aggro decks kind of peter out. They go a bit all in and that's it, game's over. But allowing them to have this extra angle forces your opponent to interact with you in ways that they don't always want to, which is a nice level to have for these kind of decks, which is really, really nice.
The traditional burn players or people who play burn in modern and other formats will know that they'll quite easily get their opponent down to, say, 5-6 life, no problem, and then it's the mercy of the top decks then. But things like the Valiant triggers and the sort of the card advantage, the incremental card advantages these red decks have now means that to play these decks, it's more enjoyable because you're not screaming for the top of your deck to be good to you. But also makes it more interesting as the opponent facing against these red decks, because you've really got to decide your timing and when you're removing these creatures. You cut down as an excellent design card in standard. It really challenges the player when you actually want to use that cut down. Do you want to do it in combat? You're almost playing as if you're playing against an infect player. You don't want to interact with them during combat because of all the combat tricks you might have. Yep. So you want to sort of time it better, and it really challenges skill, I think.
Yeah, it's great. A good thing with the red decks is that they can't just go, because a lot of the red decks, not the Amonkhet, all that nonsense that they were doing back then, but like the more recent standard red decks is that they struggled in the mid to late game, but now you've got like I said, your Manifold Mouse or your Emberheart challengers, which can just pump out value massively, make late game blocking very, very awkward, and you've still got the same amazing top decks in like Screaming Nemesis or Questing Druid, which can draw you a card and then just leave a fatty just on the board, just chilling. And then you've still got your burn package. So it's very, very well.
I do think it's great to see the format because I think this is the best deck you can be doing. Like I wouldn't say in a vacuum, but I do think this is the best deck best thing you can be doing in standard right now. But it's not over the top unfair. It's a very clean best deck. In terms of enjoyment, in terms of fun, but in terms of it's not very oppressive, and it's great. I think a format is great when the game is decided on combat math rather than do this stupid combo or lock the player out. That's the best thing you do, and it's really unenjoyable. But and it's during the combat phases where it counts. I think that's where if there is a best deck in a format, I think that's an ode to a great format. I think
exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely. Fun deck, good deck, and while we've put it as number 1, it is not just a straight up clear number 1. Like this is the absolute best. Period. It's very close between the top decks here. It's not just one format rules all. Exactly. It's not like Amonkhet where it was basically red black disintegrate somebody, and that was basically it. This is much closer. It's which was
a great format still, by the way.
Yeah, it was very fun to be fair. But that leads us to our next deck, which has an entirely different style of game plan, and it's very, very cool. It came out of nowhere, a few weeks, month or so back now, and it's been doing really, really well. And that's the Esper Pixie / Dimir Enchantments bounce deck. We've put them together because they're quite similar, even though they play a little bit different. They are very similar. They both came in at around the same time. And this is a deck for me and Josh, I think. Like, we love this style of deck. We've always enjoyed this kind of thing. Value and tempo and that kind of gameplay pattern, if you will.
I think the main difference between the sort of the Esper version and the Dimir version is the Esper version pivots hard on the white sort of stuff. Your Nurturing Pixie, it's a 1 mana white flying 1/1. When Nurturing Pixie enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target non-fairy, non-land permanent you control to the owner's hand. If it's a permanent, was returned this way. Put a +1/+1 counter on Nurturing Pixie, so it can be obviously a 1-mana 2/2 most cases. And you're bouncing cards such as Hopeless Nightmare, which is a 1-mana enchantment. When Hopeless Nightmare enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. When Hopeless Nightmare is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, scry 2, and it has the additional text for late game, 2 and a black, you can sacrifice it, and then it will trigger the secondary ability. But it also plays, things like Storm Chaser Talent. You can loop that with This Town Isn't Big Enough, which is a common sort of powerful grindy engine that's been happening in Standard at the moment. But it also plays, and I want to talk about this for a little bit now, Nowhere to Run, which is 1 and a black enchantment with flash. When Nowhere to Run enters, a creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 till end of turn. Now, this part of the card, which makes it spectacular, because I want to link it to the first deck we talked about. Creatures your opponent controls can be the target of spells and abilities, though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities to those creatures have trigger. Now, before I talk about the Dimir version, because that's the point I was going on.
Don't trigger,
moment, don't trigger. So this in Standard right now. We talked about it. We talked about it in the Gruul Prowess deck with Incubus Talent. There's lots of incremental ward triggers, and this nullifies them. You've got the Terror decks with the ward triggers. You've got Shelter by Ghost with the ward trigger. You've also got Kaito, which can't be targeted in the opponent's turn if you're playing against an opponent's Kaito. This card is excellent. It's a game changer in those sort of unfair sort of not even unfair, awkward sort of creatures to remove.
Yeah.
Just while I'm finishing my point, so the Dimir version of this doesn't play white. It plays Fear of Isolation as the bounce target, as the bounce spell. And what it can do then, it pivots more into the Dimir mid-range sort of role. So the Dimir mid-range role was playing Kaitos and Curiosities as the card advantage engines. You can then sideboard fully into the Dimir version of the deck, or you can have you sort of like a hybrid version of the Esper Pixie deck and the Dimir Tempo deck. So yeah, it's really cool, like really cool.
Yeah, because it's a really interesting angle that these decks fight on. Because normally the Dimir Tempo deck fights on I'm going to draw more cards than you, and this is how I'm going to drown you out. Whereas these decks, because of cards like Hopeless Nightmare and all the bounce spells, play an angle of not only am I going to draw cards and beat you in that way, or bounce my cards and beat you in that advantage, I'm also going to make you discard everything you have. So it's really doubling down on I'm going to have all the resources and you're going to have none. That's the gameplay pattern that it wants to have. And it's a very I'm gonna feast and you're gonna famine kind of thing, which is a really interesting way to play Magic, because it allows for an angle of if you let me get my engine going and really going, you're not gonna have a good time. So you better do something to stop me. And it's always a really interesting thing if you can get that kind of lock piece almost going, because you become not only a tempo and semi-aggressive deck, but also a control deck of sorts, which can lock out games that sometimes people crawl back from. This really doesn't let you. It really tells you you're not going to come back from this if you let me get going. And it's a very punishing strategy if your opponent is underprepared.
The Achilles heel in this deck, though, compared to, so the Esper version has a really, I wouldn't say dodgy mana base, but the mana base can hurt. So you run 3 colors and you play a lot of pain lands. So as Dan would love to see lots of pain lands from their opponent, because he's going to smash you in with red cards. The lands can really hurt you in the Esper version. So the ceiling is higher in the Esper version, I believe, but the floor is the floor is also quite.
It has traps on it.
Yeah. Where the Dimir version doesn't do as I guess as the engine isn't quite as clear or isn't quite as efficient, but the mana base is so much cleaner.
Yeah, because you could definitely compare the Esper deck to like Esper Rafine before it rotated out. Esper Rafine is a very strong deck. It was very good at what it did, but it was very painful sometimes. You had a lot of pain lands because you had to make up for 3 colors. And it's even harder now because either you play a lot of tap lands to get the extra color, because you don't have the likes of the big, if you have 3 or more lands, they come in untapped kind of thing that we had during the Innistrad sets. Now you just have pain lands. Some colors have verges, which you can do it with like a Gloomlake Verge and the Flood Farm Verge, I think is the other one. but they can be a little awkward because too many verges don't work together because you have to have a basic land type land to make that work. And the only way you're really doing that in standard right now is either with a tap land, which is the surveil lands, or a basic. So you really have to be careful with how you conduct and use your mana base, because sometimes you'll draw all the verges of the wrong color, or you won't draw the basic land, and you have your 3-color deck that can only make 1 color of mana somehow, and it really sucks. So you have to be really, really careful with how you play your land base, how you action it out, and be ready to play these games that sometimes get a little out of control very quickly, like against red decks, which can be rough if you don't draw the right colored sources for your deck.
It is very backbreaking, though, like the combination of, like, especially in the Esper Pixies deck, where if you go like turn 1, your Hopeless Nightmare, you discard a card, loses 2 life, and then just pick it back up with Nurturing Pixies and play it straight back down. Or if you've got nowhere to run, just keep on looping that, or even Tithing Blade. It can be very, very backbreaking for the mono red decks. In our group chat, I was moaning to George about it the other day, saying, please stop playing this deck. I hate playing against it.
I remember watching you get Nowhere to Ran by the same Nowhere to Run
it was
13
horrible.
times in a row.
It was horrible. But no, it's a very, very, very good deck. I've not seen too much of the Demir version of it, but it looks like it's a combination of Demir mid-range tempo, splashing with the Spyglass Siren and the This Aren't It Big Enough package, and just jamming it together like they had a love child. It looks very, very interesting and very good.
Yeah, I did really well at the SCG Spotlight series, I think it was.
This one came second.
I think it was. It was I think 1 or 2 in the top 8. Very good deck, very strong deck. Had a great showing, and it genuinely might be the evolution of Demir Tempo. They do play slightly differently in some aspects, but it's something to keep an eye on because this type of deck is better against things like Zur or Mono White in some ranges because it exerts a little more control in those games, but it can have a rough time against like Esper Pixies, for example, because they run pest control, and you have so many more ones, and it can really get you if you're not careful.
The white cards pivot quite a lot because in the Esper version you have cards like you said pest control. Then it can also run Rest in Peace, etc. Like the white sideboard cards it can bring in can really hedge the game, say against the terror decks, for example. But all these basically all these decks have the common element that is sorry, the common element that is this town isn't big enough, and Stormchaser's Talent as the baseline engine of the build around engine. This town isn't big enough. Reads it's a 4 and a blue. The spell costs 3 less to cast if you target a permanent you control, and it says return up to 2 target non-land permanents to the owner's hand. So what you can do is you can tempo out a threat from your opponent, and then also bring back your Stormchaser's Talent and make another Otter, and then you can actually level up your Stormchaser's Talent to level 3, which says level 2, which says 3 in a blue. When this class becomes level 2, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So the loop is, this town isn't big enough. Stormchaser's Talent. This town isn't big enough. Back to your hand. Then bounce the original Stormchaser's Talent on one of your opponent's things, and make net another Otter, etc.
Yeah.
It's just a really good grindy engine that if you can get online in the late game is just backbreaking value.
For anyone that remembers, if they saw the Teamer Otters deck tech, that's something we talked about on there. It's that this town ain't big enough for the two of us, and Stormchaser's Talent loop together. It's a really strong thing to have. It's a lot of value that is completely contained within itself. You only need the 2 cards and then enough turns and mana to do it. You don't need anything else, which can be really, really backbreaking. But yeah, that's
really bad. It feels really bad to remove because you remove their Otter, and you've essentially 2-for-1 them because you've still got a permanent out that can do stuff in the late game. And if you level it to level 5 as well, 5 and a blue, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue red Otter, 1/1 blue and red Otter token with prowess, and you can just. It almost feels like what's the card that creates Shark Typhoon? It's almost like a Shark Typhoon effect.
Yeah, it's essentially a Shark Typhoon. Just instead of big sharks, you're making Otters with prowess, which honestly I think are cooler. So
yeah.
And that's this kind of combination of 2 decks. They're very similar, but they can play sometimes slightly different. Keep an eye out for them. They have been showing great results.
Expressed in Pioneer as well. I've seen people playing.
Yes.
In the exact same. Looks very, very good.
But that brings us to number 3, our baby, our loved one, our number one in my heart, truly. The deck that helped me win on RCQ very recently. Dimir Tempo mid-range, whatever you want to call it. That amazing, glorious, fun deck that warms my heart like no other. This is the deck that is just, to me, the most fun in Magic. It's just, there's something about playing flash threats, playing efficient removal, efficient cards, ninjutsuing in a Kaito and watching your opponent just the entire color drain out of their face because they are so sad they're going to be beaten down by a twink one more time. It's just, there's something about it that's just fantastic, you know? It's a great deck. It's something that if you learn to master, I think you'll have a great time with it because it's very hard to play around efficiently because it just does a little bit of everything really well. It can control the game, control the pace of it really, really, really efficiently. It can make your opponents not be able to attack. It can fly over your opponents. It has a great amount of card advantage. It's just great, honestly. It's what makes me happy when it comes to Magic. I like this style of deck, this style of play. It has a lot of the usual suspects that you've seen in the other decks we just mentioned, from Spyglass Siren to Enduring Curiosity, Kaito, that kind of thing. But it also has some cards like Fairy Mastermind, one of my favorites, because it says that whenever your opponent draws their second card per turn, you draw a card. So you want to draw cards? No, I draw cards. And it's great. You know, you're both drawing cards and they feel bad because they're doing all this effort and stuff to try and get their hand full. And you're just sitting back with your fairy going, haha, thanks. I'll take the free revenue. It's a great feeling to me. It makes the Beans players cry a little bit. It's really, really fun. I know Christian hates this card because every time he's on his mono white control and I play this card, he wants to cry a little bit. You can hear him across the street yelling, "Another fairy mastermind!" It's just one of those things. It's one of those things. And to me, this is one of the greatest decks you can have for an RCQ because if you are well versed, well prepared, and know exactly what you're doing, you will be able to leverage advantage over your opponent in ways that they're not ready for because you can choose how you want to play really, really well with this deck. If you want to be aggressive, you can be aggressive. If you want to sit back, control, and let them waste their resources, you can also do that. So you get to dictate the game pace very, very often. It has some issues, of course. If your opponent has big, beefy flyers or big things that are annoying or hard to remove, like the Tolarian Terrors from the Simic Terror deck, it can cause a bit of issue. But generally speaking, you have tools for just about every setting. I myself was running like a nowhere to run in my deck list to make that a little more effective, so I didn't have to worry about protection spells or ward, and that honestly gives you a big cushion for these kind of problems, or things like Zur. They can be a bit of an issue because it's a little hard to race a 6/6 lifelinker or 7/7 lifelinker that makes 2/1 bodies that block you. I think
the great thing about this deck is that you can truly express yourself as a deck builder and how you want to pivot. Because even though it's not like the Esper and the Esper and Dimir Pixies deck, which we talked about before, which is sort of, you are exploring the archetype in two different sort of decks. They're sort of standalone in how they play. With this deck, you can build it in a few different ways, whether you want to be more on the flash threat, Tashana's Tiebinders, Feyboon tricks, all that sort of stuff, where you're doing you're dictating the pace in your opponent's turn. But you can also be like, you know what, I want to play Shieldrids, I want to play Preacher of the Schisms, I want to tap out on my turn and put a threat on the battlefield that says, you have to deal with this or I'm going to take over the game. And it rewards the deck builder or the player into meta calls, because if you're expecting like a high aggro sort of meta, then you might want to play more Preacher of the Schisms. If you're expecting more sort of pixie sort of stuff, you might want to play more the flash things in their turn. Or
my personal tech choice, I had 2 Phyrexian Flesh Scourgers in the sideboard, and Dan loves that card, let me tell you. You remember how many times I've ended on 25 life, Dan, when we play our mono red versus Dimir matchups?
I've erased that from my memory, to be honest with you, Luis. I've just stripped it from it completely. I mean, this deck is basically just the standards version of what Jund used to be back in good old days of Modern. It does everything, as Josh and Louise have both said. You can dictate the pace of the game. You can either play very, very fast and kill very, very quickly, or you can take a step back, control what your opponent's doing, and then react. It can do a bit of everything. It's a very, very good deck.
Oh,
Can I just talk
I've
about
ordered
some
4 Kaitos as well, so
good?
I may just play this.
Can I just talk about some of the synergies in this deck, because there's some really interesting synergies that people aren't. It's not obvious. So it runs a counter spell package of spell stutter, which says counter target spell unless its controller plays 2, plus additional 1 for each fairy control. Well, obviously that fairy mastermind is a fairy. Great card, by the way, from designed by Yuta Takahashi from the World Championships. But it also can play, like me and Luis are playing Fey Boom Trick. Luis will tell you that this is a card that I brought to the table.
Oh yeah, you brought, yeah, Josh. Yeah.
But also, if you look at the mana base, it plays Soulstone Sanctuary. So I've seen it. So Soulstone Sanctuary is it's a Mutavault on steroids, essentially. So it's a colorless land. But when you pay 4, this land becomes a 3/3 creature with vigilance and it's all creature types, which means that it's a fairy too. So I've actually seen a play where someone's activated the Soulstone Sanctuary, and then I've done it before as well, and then spell stuttered to add the additional cost into countering into not countering the spell, so they can't pay for it. But also, because it's any card type, it's also a ninja. So with Kaito, with the plus ability, Kaito says +1, you get an emblem with ninjas you control, get +1/+1. Well, guess what? Soulstone Sanctuary is a ninja, and often at times I've had a 7/7 vigilance just sat there blocking the board up, and I'm just attacking every turn. So you can actually attack with it and then tap it after declare attacks to then cast something at instant speed. So it's some really cool little synergies in this deck that I really enjoy.
Which is amazing, because like you said, it's a Mutavault, but it's on steroids because it does not go away from being a creature once you activate it. Yeah. You only have to activate it once, and it stays as a creature, which is not normal for manlands. Most people will probably have never seen one like this before. I myself love running 4 because of those synergies that we mentioned with Spell Stutter and Kaito. Yeah. I think it's one of the best things you can be doing. I think it's the strongest manland in Standard, bar none. I don't think there's anything that's stronger than it. Yes, the colored ones are quite cool. They have some neat effects, but there's just something about this card that stands out to me. There's also some interesting little tidbits you can do with it, because a lot of people don't expect you to ninjutsu it away. So you can sometimes get somebody with it. They're like, oh yeah, it's just a land. But no, it's more than just that. Now it's a ninjutsu target, which is really cool. And you can pay for its own ninjutsu, which is so sick. I'll tap it and then throw it away after I've attacked with it to get a Kaito out. And then I'll replay it because I haven't played my land for a turn. And it's a neat way to get that stuff going. Do be careful. If you activate it, it can't tap for mana if it just came in that turn. So make sure you tap it before. Yeah, exactly. Tap it before you activate it if it just came in that turn. Just so you don't make some mistakes like some of us may have done before in the past. But yeah, it's a really, really cool land. It has some amazing text on it. And there's just a lot of interesting synergies. One of my favorites, and probably the thing that will get you addicted to this deck, is when you go Floodpit's Drowner on whatever creature, and then you attack with it unblocked, and you have 5 mana, so you go, I'll activate my Floodpit's Drowner, priority held, I will now activate ninjutsu ability of Kaito, so the Floodpit's Drowner goes back to your hand while their creature shuffles away, and you get a Kaito on the battlefield. There's nothing quite like it. It feels amazing. It will addict you to doing all these kind of ninjutsu.
I don't think I've ever done that yet.
It's so much fun. I did it because of Pioneer. I was playing the ninjas deck in Pioneer. It's a lot easier there because you get the 2 mana ninja that has single blue ninjutsu, so you can do it really easily there just for 3 mana. But it's just, you can do it with Kaito. It's a great feeling. It's card advantage, plus you're throwing away their guy, plus you're gaining a Kaito, and they know you have another Floodprince in hand, so they're crying because you're tapping them out. Or if anyone was still playing, what's his name? The Archfiend of the Dross, I think it was called.
That card?
It's just It's the greatest feeling in the world when you just tap it, put a stun counter on it, and then do it again with Kaito, and now they have to kill their own Archfiend or they die. It's just,
Yeah.
it's a chef's kiss.
We were talking about this, weren't we, Dan? I think we all were in the team. Like, how Archery the Dross can you can use that as a win condition against them because you can Kaito it, add two. Kaito can be sometimes just a straight or
Two
removal
stun
spell.
counters,
So you've got
Yeah,
two stun
yeah.
counters, add the stun counter. Yeah.
And it's a great feeling. And there's so much you can do. I think it's definitely a deck that is going to keep being strong. I don't expect it to go away anytime soon. Hopefully Aether Drift doesn't ruin my dreams. Maybe we'll get Fatal Pushback and the deck will be even better, right?
Because even just like looking at the cards that are in this deck, like you don't lose a lot when Standard does next rotate. Like you got Fairy Mastermind and Cut Down. They're the main ones that I can see, and then like your Dark Switch, also some of your lands, but then they're just going to get replaced by other dual lands that Wizards are either going to reprint or just make new ones. So I don't think this deck's going to be going anywhere for a very, very long time. I think Kaito's definitely here to stay, and is going to rule Standard.
You could bring this deck if you don't know a meta, like you haven't got a clue on meta, because the Esper decks and the sort of aggro decks are sort of I'm not defining the meta now, but usually in a play group they're either heavy on one or heavy on the other, especially in the UK right now. So if you're expecting like a heavy aggro meta, you probably bring in Pixies. If you're expecting a heavy Pixie meta, you might bring something else. But this deck, you can just be like, I don't know what the meta's going to be. I'm just going to bring Dimir.
They have some fun.
Yeah.
Dan, do you want to move? Should we move on to the next one? And I don't know if you want to introduce this next one for us, Dan.
So this is the least Dan deck that I could possibly think of. This is Domain Control. So it's got all of the, well, not all of them, but it's got a lot of the overlords from the Dustmon set. So it has Overlord of Flood Pits, Overlord of Hawkwoods, Overlord of Mistmoors, and then like Zerd Eternal Schema, which is white, blue, and a black for a 1/4 flying. Enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. And then 1 and a white, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types and has base power and toughness equal to its mana value. Now, the cool thing with the Overlords is they have an impending cost. So, say Overlord and Mistmoss, for example, it's 5 white and a white, but it has impending for 2 white and a white, impending 4. So that means that it comes into the battlefield as just an enchantment, a non-aura enchantment, and at the end step you tick down. It's essentially like Suspend, but the new way of them doing Suspend.
Yeah.
And then when Overlord of Mistmoss enters or attacks, you make 2/1 white insect tokens with flying. So you play the Overlord for 4 mana on the impending cost, and then next turn you've got 5 mana, so you play Zer, animate your Overlord. You've now got a 7/7 attacking, that's lifelink, indestructible, hexproof, and then it leaves 2/1 creatures behind as well. So this deck is very, very good at being essentially the control deck of Standard days gone, where we're not seeing like many blue-white controls deck. Counter spells just aren't that good in Standard at the minute, so they've just gone to go big, have a little bit of a combo, and just pair that with a load of removal and go from there. So you can just randomly take over a game on turn 5 with an Overlord of the Mistmoors, and then it has like Overlord of Hawkwoods, which ramps you, and Overlord of Flood Pits, which draws you cards, and then Atraxa, because it can just randomly cast Atraxa out of nowhere. So it's a very, very good deck. I got absolutely trounced by a Jund version of this at an RCQ on Sunday. I was on 17, I was playing Terra, and then out of nowhere, just dead. Because Overlord of the Boiler Burgess is a ridiculous card, it turns out. Just
got domed for
ridiculous
17
card.
in one turn. What a time to be alive.
Ridiculous.
But it's interesting you said about counter spells aren't the great right now in Standard. And I would agree. But what is really good now is generally permanent removal. So this deck is stacked with permanent removal. You've got a removal suite of Elspeth Smite, Get Lost, Split Up, Day Judgment, Sunfall, etc., which really cover a lot of the bases of this deck. And because you do have Overlords of the Flood Pits, because you are that, putting chocolate at the board with Overlord and Mistballs with the white insect tokens, because you got the Leyline and the Binding package that can get turned on. Leyline and the Binding, sorry, which can get turned on really easily with the Overlord of the Hauntwoods trigger, which creates a tapped colorless land token called Everywhere, and it's every basic land type. So you can have, you would activate this once, or you get the trigger off it once, and you've got essentially domain there and then. So Leyline of the Binding is really good removal there. Really hits a lot of things, and standard is very permanent heavy right now.
Yeah.
It is definitely one of the decks of all time. It's one of my least favorite.
This is a deck.
It's a deck. It is a very strong deck, and I hate it very, very much because it is quite good into the decks I tend to like to play. It's very annoying to try and fight it because it's just all kinds of value. Up the Beanstalk, it is not a balanced Magic card in any way, shape, or form. And while you're casting your impending things for 3 or 4 or whatever, it still triggers Up the Beanstalk because it's just an alternate casting cost of a bigger 5, 6, 7 drop. So it all works in that way. Same thing with Leyline Binding. You're usually paying 1 for it, and you're still drawing a card because that's a very fair and well thought out mechanic. It makes a lot of sense to me. It is one of the most frustrating things when your opponent just opens up and goes Beanstalk, Beanstalk, here, 1 spell, draw 2 cards, 1 spell, draw 2 cards, never run out of cards for the rest of the game. Oh, look, I'm dead. There is a Zern 20 power on the battlefield because that's just how it works. Very, very powerful. It does have, its fair amount of issues. The mana base can punish you sometimes. It plays a lot of tap lands because it has to support not just a lot of colors, but also the land types themselves because it cares about domain. And you want, double green card, double blue card, double white card, all these kind of things. It's not the easiest thing to do. So it can sometimes lose to itself in that kind of way. But it is very strong.
It is a 4 Cabinet Souls deck as well, which can sort
of... Too, yeah.
Definitely helps.
It can sort of, if you're naming
Avatar,
human or wizard or something, then you have to name Avatar, and the mana might be awkward, especially if you want to turn on Zer as well, and you might not have the spare white mana, so you might not be able to do it in that turn. But the weakness of this deck is if you're an aggro player like Dan, you can get underneath this deck really early. The early turns really can dictate the pace with this deck. But if you let the deck, cast an unchecked beans and then untap after turn 4, turn 5, it can really run away with the game.
It's very, very hard to beat.
The early turns are very, very, very key with this deck. This deck could have been oppressive, but I'll turn our attention again back to Nowhere to Run. Really means that even though they have the hexproof creatures, you can still tap them, you can still interact with them because of cards like Nowhere to Run, which are showing up in the top decks right now. So the Domain, it's a hell of a deck,
Oh yeah, I know there's some people that they're absolutely feasting on these styles of decks. They love the value, they love the beans, they love all this kind of jazz. And if you are that kind of player, please don't sit within a 50-meter radius of me. But also, I hope you enjoy this deck. It is very, very good. The Jund version did win the Sunday RCQ at our local game store. And it looked really, really cool. Boiler Burgess is one heck of an overlord. Obviously here we've only linked to the usual version, which is the Esper slash it's Esper plus green, right? Essentially, or green being the fixer color. I can't remember. There's an actual name for minus red. I don't know what it's actually called.
Could not tell you.
But it's how the deck works. It's fantastic, honestly. Very, very fun. For the people who enjoy it. It has a lot of cool wraths as well. So if you're a wrath enjoyer, like your big old mono white or blue white players, you're gonna like this deck.
Just a question. So if you overload the Boiler Bill, but I don't know how to say that word.
Boiler Bilges.
Boiler Bilges. Does the Jund doesn't play Zer then, does it?
No. The Jund version does not play Zer. It doesn't play white at all. It's literally straight up Jund, and it's using cards like Hauntwoods to fix its mana and get domain. It doesn't use Leyline Binding because again it doesn't play white, and its removal package is more based around black and some red cards like Boiler Bilges himself. It has its own fair share of nowhere to run, go for the throat, and that style of card. And then the one that we saw had things like either Shieldred or Preacher of the Schism as extra filler cards to just get it over that hump when it's trying to make sure it has everything set up.
Yeah.
So it's not going to do the big lifelink like turn
not for that
5
one.
thing. It's just more of a
it doesn't do
typical jun them out till turn 5 and then win the game after
And
that.
then Pyroclasm your little dudes as well.
Pyroclasm.
Oh, yeah.
Very underplayed card in Standard from what I've noticed.
Yeah,
Very
for sure.
underplayed.
Like I'm just looking at Paul's list from the Sunday, and it's just got the 4 green overlords, 3 boiler burges, a Vivian Reed, and then 2 Phyrexian Flesh Gorges. That's its win con package, and then the rest of it is just removal spells, board wipes in, deadly cover ups,
And beans.
and beans. That's
I'll tell you what, Dan. I'll tell you what, Dan. And if you send us that link, we'll actually put that in the show notes as well for the viewers to have a look at, because that's actually quite interesting.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't have to assemble all the white cards, you can just make it a more clean mana base and more of a clean game plan. It's probably easier to actually build. Potentially for some people.
If you don't have to play the most boring color in Magic, I think it's usually a positive thing.
White is the most boring color. It's a sideboard.
Oh, Christian has to be seething right now.
We have resident D&T players where I'm from, and I was saying, what are you playing 75 sideboard cards for?
But that leads us to number 5 on our list. A very fun deck and a little close to our heart, maybe, from what we're playing in Modern, Josh.
I would say white in these sort of decks is an exception, because blue white sort of aggro-esque decks are actually something I really like. Actually, it reminds me of my days.
He's
when
a Spirits player. That's what she's saying.
Yeah.
He's a Spirits player. Yeah.
Yeah, that's different. That's different. White cards there are not.
Whatever you say. Whatever you say.
Boring.
Yeah. Do as I say, not as I am, or whatever it is. Yeah.
Correct. Correct.
So the next one on the list, number 5, is the Azorius Oculus deck, which is using the tried and true strategy of I'm going to put my Oculus into the bin and then reanimate it with a 1 or 2 mana spell.
Sounds familiar, that.
Oh, just a little bit, no? Yeah. It's a very cool deck. It is using one of the old strategies, if people remember when Mono Blue was around with the Djinn, Haughty Djinn, or before that was the Tempest Djinn, I think it was called, back when Dominaria, it was like another 3 blue Djinn that existed.
I'll take your word for it.
And it uses that strategy of tempoing out, having a bit of control the elements. But in this case, it changes some of those control tools for reanimation / draw kind of effects. So it's using Abhorrent Oculus, Haughty Djinn, and Kiora the Rising Tide as the big effects to bring back or use. And then cards like Picklock Prankster or Charter Course to be able to get things into your bin. And then uses Recommission or Helping Hand to bring them back. So these are, I'm essentially going to break them down into 3 different sections. So you have the fatties, which is Abhorrent Oculus and Haughty Djinn and Kiora. They're just strong creatures. They do big things. They can win the game on their own if they're left unchecked. And they're very, very powerful at what they do. You have the enablers. Kiora kind of double dips here because she also draws 2 discards too when she enters the battlefield. You have Picklock Prankster, Charter Course. What's the name of the enchantment? Moment of Truth is the instant as well. And there's an enchantment they use sometimes. I think it's Founding of the Third Path to get cards into your bin. And then you have your reanimation spells. These are your cheap, easy to use ways of bringing back your fatties. Helping Hand and Recommission are the most common ones. Sometimes they splash for a 3rd color or have other ways to do it, but that's the most common way. And like I said before, with Founding the Third Path, because it's a saga, it has a few different steps. It kind of double dips on this one. It has mill 4, or it has play a spell from your graveyard as a 3rd step, and you target the Recommission or the Helping Hand, and you do it that way. So Helping Hand is essentially a white unearth without cycling, and it brings back the creature tapped, whereas Recommission is a 2 mana effect. It brings back the creature with a +1/+1 counter. That's basically it. And it's a very strong way of getting and cheating out Oculus or Djinn or Kiora and then just taking over the game. If you leave an Oculus early unchecked, making a 2 each turn, hitting you for 5 is backbreaking. The thing takes over games quickly. Or with a Jin, because you're playing so many spells, milling so many cards, and going so quickly, not only is it making your protection and setup spells cheaper by 1, it is also a massive creature. It could easily be an 11-4 or 15-4 or whatever and just kill you in 1 turn. So you have to be very, very careful when playing around this deck with not allowing them to bring these things back unchecked. Because if they do, you're not going to have a good time.
One of the weaknesses of this deck, obvious weaknesses, is that Louisa previously said, taking away the control-y sort of stuff, the interaction to be more game enabling, to get this sort of unfair advantage on the opponent really early. It does play things like Enter the Flood more, which is temporary answer to some problems. A couple of copies of Get Lost, and that's about it. Like your hard sort of removal that you would see in the Xur decks. You don't really see in this style of deck, so they can have the opportunity for the opponent to stumble. He could picklock Prankster and mill 4 lands, for example, or picklock Prankster and mill just all your creatures and no payoff, and then you just essentially just doing nothing. And that's the sort of weakness of this deck, but the ceiling is very high. You know what I mean? Like you get a turn 3 Oculus out. Unless you got an answer, a very specific answer there and then, because the red answers probably won't really do it. It's lights out.
It's part of the reason why a card like Anoint with Affliction rose in popularity, not only for the Gruul decks that had their annoying creatures, but also because of this. Anoint with Affliction deals with Oculus, deals with Haughty Djinn by exiling them, not just killing them. Because if you go for the throat it, they can just bring it back. It's a real problem. So this kind of deck is hard to keep in check, but it is very, very strong. And I think, like Josh was saying, if this deck consistently did its thing without fail turn 2 or even turn 3, it might be just straight up the best deck. Because
can it turn 1?
No.
I suppose it could. Yeah, I suppose it can't turn 1, but it can turn 2 if you Meticulous Archive and Oculus.
Yeah, Meticulous Archive and Oculus, exactly. Yeah. So it's very, very cool in what it does. And it's a deck that honestly keeps showing up with some pretty decent results. I think it was part of the top 8 at the SCG Spotlight Series event. And it still shows up on MTG Top 8 or MTG Goldfish on all kinds of different things and tournament events. And it's definitely a deck to watch out for.
Eli Swafford was playing this deck.
Yeah,
he was.
In SCG.
And it's very cool as well because it has an interesting sideboard plan with a card that many of the veteran Magic players will know and love. Monastery Mentor.
Buddy.
It's a great card to...
More of the interesting white cards that there are there.
Exactly. To do the usual thing of getting it out early and then just spam spells, make a bunch of little monks, and have some fun. It's a great way to just enjoy Magic.
It's to pivot your game plan in against heavy graveyard hate. For example, if you're if you're playing an RC or something with open Decklists, and you see 4 Leyline, 4 Rest in Peace, you're like, well, I guess my Oculus is going to be textless in this game. So guess what? I'm playing my my Monastery Mentor and winning you with prowess.
Exactly, and it's just a great deck. It has a good matchup into, I think, usually the Esper Pixie and oh, actually, that just made me remember. Yes, it can turn 1, Josh.
Go on.
Your opponent goes turn 1, Hopeless Nightmare. You discard Oculus, you play land, and you reanimate your Oculus.
Yes. Correct. So maybe this is the answer. Maybe this is the answer to the Pixies meta. Let them enable your game strategy. Sure.
Very good to them.
Oh, you want me to discard a card? Oh, that's such a shame. I'll just put this big fat mama jammer into my graveyard. Oh, turn 1, my turn. Oh, I'll just reanimate it.
It's so good. It's great into those kind of decks.
That bad boy.
It's good into Dimir Tempo as well, because the Tempo deck can sometimes struggle to get around the Oculus and Jin and fight them effectively because they are flyers and they are very, very annoying. Or even the Picklock Prankster, a 1/3 body is surprisingly annoying to get around.
With Vigilance.
With Vigilance.
Vigilance as a mechanic is so good in Standard right now.
Mm-hmm.
Beza is so good. I fully agree. It's it's an amazing little thing that this deck can do. It even has cards like Doorkeeper Thrall, which can disable a lot of the strong ETB effects that are in Standard right now. And just keep an eye out for this deck. It's rising. I think it's definitely... a deck that can be answered with proper graveyard hate, but it's not always easy to fit enough graveyard hate when decks like Gruul are around punching your face in, and you have to have enough removal spells for them. And yeah, that's the top 5 of the decks we're talking about.
You got anything to add on this one, Dan?
I think we've covered everything. Like a Boring Oculus is so good. We've all seen it from like the modern season. Like Josh and Luis both play a Boring Oculus, and they will swear that this is the best card that's ever been printed. Maybe not Luis. He's got his Flame Blade Adept up on his wall behind him. But it's such a good card, and it's.
Well, I've got a Glory Bringer right there, so
no one asked, Josh. I'm kidding. Love you, buddy.
It's like it's very hard, like as a mono red player to beat this. Like I played against someone again at the RCQ, who like turn 3 they reanimated an Oculus. I killed it with one of my 5 kill spells that could possibly kill an Oculus, and then next turn he reanimated it again, killed it, reanimated. But this time with recommission, so it's a 6/6. I can't kill a 6/6 any way, shape, or form. So I cried a little bit. I was like, oh.
And every turn you go to kill it, it's replaced itself with a 2/2. That's probably another Oculus or a Hortigen.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Get that,
attack with your what do you call it? Your face down creature. What's the mechanic called?
Manifest.
Yeah.
Manifest creature. Yeah. Surprise, buddy! Boom! Take 12 off my Hortigen.
Oh god,
it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's insane. Or when you get like a second Oculus after that, it's also brutal.
Yeah, and then it just like Oculus, like you just play it, even like helping hand, help having it enter tapped doesn't matter because you just make a 2/2 in your opponent's upkeep. Like, it just floods the board for no reason. It's so stupid. It's my most hated card at the minute. I hate it.
People either love this card or they hate it.
Yeah,
Like,
there's
and
no
I
in between.
absolutely love it.
It's a good card. It's a fantastic card.
But if you're not playing it in modern, play it in modern.
Yeah.
So that's our top 5.
Yep, that's the top 5. And then we have 2 more decks to talk about, only very briefly. These are just honorable mentions, decks that didn't quite make the top cut, but were very, very, very close.
Womp womp.
One of them is Mono White Tokens, the Caretaker's Talent control deck. Very good deck. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It controls the board, and it makes a crap load of tokens.
Yep.
And because of these tokens, it can actually draw cards with Caretaker's Talent. And Enduring Innocence. It's essentially how it functions. And it has just good, efficient, strong removal, like Lay Down Arms or Get Lost, and some strong wraths like Sunfall and Split Up. So it's probably the premier control deck, like hard control deck aside from the Zur deck. And it is very strong. It often puts up results. It was very, very, very close to be in the top 5. We decided that Oculus just overtook it, but just a little bit. But definitely don't sleep on this deck. It's still very good. And I think it has a lot of ways to be reinvented. It could even have a Black Splash and play Pest Control. Yeah. Who knows? There's a lot of things it can do.
It's a great better call at the moment. And, you can splash. Get Lost is a very, very good card right now in Standard. There's a lot of low to the ground, horrible little permanents. Standard's all about answering permanents, not about answering the stack. And this deck is great into sort of like an aggro / low to the ground sort of format where sort of meta where you want to kill or stop them from basically killing you with damage because you can gain so much life, you can clog up the board, etc. And then if you do Sunfall, guess what? You don't care if all your creatures get killed because you made so many creatures and so many things on the battlefield that your Sunfall is now I've seen a 12/12. A 12/12, what do we call it?
Phyrexian
artifact.
Yeah. That can't be Go for the Throated, which is makes me angry.
Can I just say how underrated it's Split Up? It's such a good card. Like 3 mana can be a one-sided board wipe against like the red decks. It's absolutely insane.
It's a very good Wrath. I think it's probably it's underplayed.
It looks very slept on.
I see this played a lot in the Convoke decks because they can actually have agency on which one they use, so they can actually convoke something in, and then instead of all the creatures dying, only one of them, they actually pick which mode you actually use in that sort of deck, which is a Convoke deck we did talk about. I do think that if you asked us a month ago, what would have been the top 5? We probably would have put Convoke in there, but I think Convoke's really dropped off. I think a lot of decks answer Convoke now quite efficiently. But yeah, this. Honestly, if you're playing mono white right now, Christian, I wouldn't change your deck, Christian.
No, very good deck.
And
Very
then
well positioned in meta.
The second deck we wanted to mention is for honorable mentions. I guess it's second and third together. It's the Teamer Otters deck that we did a deck tech on, and the Simic Terror deck. The reason I'm putting them together is because they have a lot of similarities. They are completely different decks, don't get me wrong, but they both have that green-blue package of This Town Ain't Big Enough and Storm Chaser's Talent.
Yeah.
Plus just generic, good, strong green cards. In the case of the Teamer Otters deck, it has what's called Enduring Vitality, Analyze the Pollen, and Bushwhack as its effects for...
Don't tell them the secrets, because there's a whole deck tech and sideboard guide.
Sorry, you're right. If you want to check what this deck's all about,
free sideboard guide, free deck tech, it's all there. Just go back and watch it.
Check out the Teamer.
Don't tell him, Luis.
Okay.
Let him find out.
The other deck, right, is Simic Terrors. Very similar in a lot of the cards it plays, but it is different. It's not a combo deck, that one. It's a value engine of, I'm going to put stuff into my bin, make a 5/5, and then beat you down with it while tempoing you out, bouncing your stuff, not letting you play the game, and laughing at you, essentially. Very, very strong decks. I'll put we'll make sure we put links to these as well for you guys in the honorable mention section. And that's essentially the standard rundown. I know it wasn't a lot to talk about with the honorable mentions, but like I said, they just weren't quite enough to make the top cut. But keep an eye out, because we are doing a lot of deck techs for standard, which we're gonna be focusing on those over the next few weeks to come as well. Especially when I come back.
As soon as you're done with the RC, yeah.
Exactly. So keep an eye out, guys. If you like one of the decks that we talked about here, you can probably expect a deck tech from us. We're probably going to have it throughout the next few weeks as we go along. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled.
Well, I mean, I know you've already qualified, Luis, but let's just go round robin now. What decks, if you had an RCQ tomorrow, what deck are you taking? So, Luis, you're not qualified. You got an RCQ tomorrow. What deck are you taking?
I'm taking the Dimir Enchantments Bounce deck. That's my deck of choice.
Dan?
I think it would either be that or the Terror deck. Terror is so good.
Yeah, I'm sort of torn. So I'm currently I'm torn between the basic Dimir deck, the Enchantments deck, and the Dimir sorry, not the Dimir one, the blue green Terror deck. But I think actually tomorrow, if I had to go to an RCQ, I think I would just take basic Dimir mid range. I think that deck's solid. Like, it still wins challenges. You still see Dimir enchantments in the challenges, and then right at the top, boom, Dimir mid range, and you just change it to how you think your meta's going to be. And Enduring Curiosity is still a hell of a drug. Kaito, it's still efficient. I really like the Fairy Mastermind. It's a great card. A lot of people are off it now. It's a card that you sideboard out a lot of games. But it's still a great card.
It's fantastic.
Turn 2, here's a 2/1 in the air, evasion, does stuff. Great if you don't have a counter spell for beans, you can get accumulate value along with them. If they had beans trigger, I was testing against the blue green Terror deck the other day, because I built up for my friend Steven, shout out to Steven, who could play it with me. And I was testing against that the other day. He had a beans out, and I had 3 Fairy Masterminds out. So every time he was triggering his beans, I was drawing 3. Not every time, but the first time, the second card. I remember he did it in my upkeep. Like, you would do something in my upkeep. It's 2 beans triggered on the stack. Right, first one resolves. Second one, I'll draw 2. Oh, look, I've drew the answer to the thing you're trying to do.
Oh, what a great feeling! What a great feeling!
Yeah.
You guys happy with this one? Anything else anyone wants to add regarding what's going on with standard? What do you think?
Go on, Dan. I'll give you the space for you, since you're the third arm of the Chad Magic trio.
No, I like
Battle
it.
Chad trio today.
Yeah, I like standard at the minute. It's very fun, and like there's these top 5 decks that me, Lewis, and Josh think that are the best 5 in standard that you should possibly be playing. But there's so many decks that we've not even talked about. Like there's Boros Mice, you've got green white aggro, which just completely counters the Pixie deck. The Convoke deck, which can be a bit iffy. Sam does not like it at all. He'll write War and Peace on the Y, doesn't like that. But it's very very good on like how it's placed. You can even just rock just straight up mono red burn and just play bolt waves and burst lightnings. It's so good. I'm excited to see where it's going to come in the next couple of sets that come out. Like we've got Aether Drift in February, February 14th. So I'm very excited to see what
Valentine's
cards come
Day.
out from that. Yeah.
I've actually played an RCQ in Birmingham on the 15th. So I wonder if like. I think to me a mid range would be a great deck to pick in that because what's the meta going to be like? I don't know. Well, to me a mid range, so it'd be a great.
Nothing's going to change from that, is it?
And genuinely for everyone, it is a brewer's paradise right now. There is a lot of things to be explored, a lot of cards that suddenly have synergy. It's crazy. So if you reckon that you might be able to make something happen, try it out. There was like a Demure Control the other day without the demon package that it was running before. Did really, really well. Shout out to my friend Sam who got to the finals. Oh, sorry, the semifinals with it. Very, very strong deck. Funnily enough, my Demure Tempo deck knocked him out of the RCQ both times. Once piloted by me, once piloted by my teammate Duffy. But he was on a complete just brew style deck. I owned a C-Fort on a Demure Control deck, and he liked the shell, so he took it and ran with it and made it his own, and it worked out. So try and brew something up. You never know how well and how good it might be. There's a lot of really cool things to do in Standard.
This Pixie deck reminded me of, I know I'm talking about Legacy because I know Legacy. Look at this guy. Always talks about Legacy. But when the blue-black Reanimator deck came to be, that deck was in the format. Like those cards were legal for 12, 13 months before someone went, oh, this deck is a thing. And that's sort of what happened with the Esper Pixie deck. Like one day someone went, oh, we've got this town's big enough and the Storm Chasers thing. Oh, what else can we bounce? And then someone just discovered it with the card pool that's already there. It's only going to get Standard's going to have a big card pool. Over the next 5 years, it's going to have a massive card pool. It's going to be, like Louis said, a brewer's paradise. But even though we know the meta's sort of settled and it's sort of set, and it probably will be settled now till February. Again, like there's still things to discover till February.
Yeah.
Give it a go. Standards are made. And if you're an LGS owner and you listen to this podcast, please make your FNMs standard.
Absolutely.
Advertise your FNMs too.
Just be standard. Like then you'll start drafts become reasonable. Sealed becomes reasonable. Move your stock to play standard and just support standard, please. As someone who doesn't have a well, I've got a couple of LGSs in the works right now. Not for me personally, but there's sort of new
opening a bunch of LGSs.
I'm just,
I'm happy with it, guys. This is to reiterate everything. Play Standard. Try it out. I think you'll really have a good time. It's worth it, and we highly recommend it.
Standard and Modern, so good right now.
Oh yeah,
so good.
Very, very good. And hopefully Pioneer soon, one day, if they eventually bring it back.
What's Pioneer? What is that?
Rest in peace.
Anyway, guys, thank you everyone for listening and joining us on this podcast. I hope that you learned a thing or two, and that we got your standard gears grinding, that you're ready to come back and give it a go. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us, what your favorite standard deck is, what it is that you're playing right now, and why you think it's the number one best deck to exist. And if you can, as a special bonus, please let us know how many words and how many cards that Josh mispronounced or did not say right. Like Leyline of the Binding, that was a great one. Please let us know, and if you can give us the exact number, you win a prize. I don't know what the prize is, but we'll figure it out.
I can't say anything. I had my fair few as well.
Give a shout out to someone, Dan. Shout someone out.
Shout out, Mum. You've been with me all my life. Appreciate you.
Fantastic. Take care, everybody.
I also shout out to your mum as well, and tell her I'll pick my. I'm not going to go there.
Yep.
Yeah.
She makes very good breakfasts. Let's say that.
Bye. See you later,
everyone.
everybody. Take
Bye.
care.